Hello again, everyone. As you are fully aware by now, I'm Professor Robert Romano, and you are my students. All right, welcome back to Sports Ethic and Social Justice. This is video 6. And today we're going to talk about a sports development program called Midnight Basketball. But before we get into that, let's do a little background on these community-based sports-oriented crime prevention programs, right? Because that's what Midnight Basketball was, right? It was community-based, sports-oriented. It was basketball, and it was implemented to prevent crime. Crime initially in the that was prevalent in the D.C. area, right? So these community-based sport-oriented crime prevention programs use the concept of sport to prevent crime and also to prevent the risk of crime. All right, so it's interesting. They prevented crime, but also prevented the risk of crime. They give that mindset to people that they can go out in the evening, because the people who would be committing the crimes would be playing basketball, allegedly playing basketball. So they were touted as inexpensive, effective ways to approach crime prevention, and they came in various types and various sizes, right? So, in the 1980s, roughly, these community-based sports-oriented programs came about. And they were told, this is an inexpensive and effective way to help clean up the streets, right? To help keep crime prevention from happening in your community. And if you spend a little money, you give a little attention to it, you can have, basically different leagues that can keep the teenagers occupied so they wouldn't get into trouble, right? And there were all different kinds, right? There were small single sport programs. There were citywide multi-sport, fully for the full summer type programs, and there were also some that were large. Some were so large that they were run by experts, right? Some at the Olympic Training Centers, some at other sports foundations. So these community-based sports-oriented crime prevention programs were varied, very small, single sports, multi-sports, all the way up to Olympic and Sports Foundation type. All right. So some examples include police athletic leagues, prison boot camps, midnight basketball, we're going to talk about, and they involve different sports, right? Basketball being one of them, calisthenics, some martial arts, and even motocross. So there are variations in which sport would be the concentration for these crime prevention programs, depending on where you were, where you lived, urban, rural, that kind of thing. Initially, they were not thought out very well. This is to say, I don't want to be negative, but they just weren't thought out very well, not well understood, and they were stereotypical, right? They were just based on stereotypes, right? Southerners like this, inner city kids like this, Italians like this, blah, blah, blah. It was just predicated on these stereotypes of minority population, right? And this was stemmed from how this was initially done at the turn of the century, because there were these community-based, sports-oriented crime prevention programs that were implemented around the turn of the century, from the 1900s, when all the immigrants were coming in from Italy, Ireland, Germany, wherever. And they would set up these sports programs to keep the kids off the streets, keeping them from deviant behavior and delinquency. Right, so they were based on that. So they were not well thought out. They were stereotypical. They didn't really understand the people, didn't understand the community. But some of them worked, but maybe not so well. So what we're going to talk about today is how programming can be effective when it is implemented and administered properly, right? And to do that, it must include not only the sport, but it must include some kind of an educational component or job-related component to it. Job training, interview training, that kind of thing, all right? But always being based on this premise, sport is a powerful tool for outreach, recruitment, and retention of program participants. All right, so it was based on sport. Like I said, sport is that tool that brings people in, but when you have them, they need to be effectively implemented, effectively administered, and they need to be more than just sport. You got to have more than just that one component in order for it to be effective and to be worthwhile. One such program, Midnight Basketball. All right, I don't know if you ever heard of this. Came about in the 1980s. We're going to analyze the role that it played in recruitment and retention of this hard to reach populations and how they were successful. All right, and how they use their public visibility and symbolic value at the community level. All right, so we're going to analyze this midnight basketball. And, while you think of your sports development program, could it be based on something like what midnight basketball did? Sure. Take the good components of it, yeah, and then make it better. All right, so we're going to analyze how they reached out to their community, how they were successful, and how they became symbolic within various communities. Midnight basketball, like I said, came about in the late 1980s. It was a brainchild of Standifer, Mr. Standifer. He was convinced that the keys to the problems of poor inner city youth, especially young men, was the absence of a safe, constructive activities during high crime time, late night hours. All right, that 10 to 2 period. So he was convinced that in order to get the key to success for the problems of the inner city, especially the inner city young men, was to keep them active and keep them entertained and to keep them engaged during these high crime times, these late night hours. All right, so he came up with this concept of midnight basketball, right? Sports programs, on the premise that sports programs would provide an alternative to non-productive or even destructive activities of the street. All right, have the kids on the court playing a game. They're not going to be on the street doing anything non-productive or destructive. All right, that was the concept in a nutshell. Another way to channel energy, channel attention, and to channel focus onto something positive, sport, as opposed to something non-productive, non-positive, and destructive. All right, midnight basketball, as the name says, it was a basketball league. It was created in the Washington, D.C. area initially, and it ran between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Okay, there go the name, midnight basketball. It was simple and inexpensive to run, but it only ran during the summer months. Okay, so midnight basketball leagues created in the D.C. area, basketball league for young men, young inner city men between 10 p.m. and 2 p.m. Simple and inexpensive, running during the summer months. In order to participate, you had to be a young male, aged 17 to 21, and you had to be, you had to be part of the program, right? You can't do pickup games before 10 p.m. It's just the rule that they had. The league starts at 10. It's going to run from 10 to 2. And interestingly enough, one of the caveats to run this program was that they would have to have 2 uniformed police officers visible during the games. I don't know. It's one of the things I'm a little on the fence about. I mean, I can see pros and cons to having this. I think it's more of a con, especially in today's climate. But I think having a police presence may be important because it can build a bond between the police and the inner city youth. If it's used as a force or as something as intimidation, no. But it's used to bridge that gap. Maybe having 2 police officers there to ref. Maybe having 2 police officers there to coach. Maybe having 2 police officers to be the team leader. That kind of stuff to get the teams going. Then I'm okay with that. It gets the police involved with the community and builds that relationship, breaks down those barriers where you can break down those trust barriers. All right, like we talked about previously. The creator, Standifer, claims that once he implemented his program, within the first 3 years, there was a 30% reduction in late night crime. Right, and one of the quotes from one of the administrators was, "I haven't seen one of these basketball players back in jail since the program began." Were his claims true? There's been some debate, about the methodology in his claim, 30% reduction in late night crime, but it did have an impact, and that was the important thing. All right, the numbers I don't think are so important here, but the fact that it did have an impact, I think, is what is important, right? Based on the fact that it had this impact, it grew, right? Subsequently, other cities started picking up the midnight basketball program. One of them being Chicago, and Chicago implemented it with a matching fund from HUD, $50,000, and they were able to implement this midnight basketball program in their community. If you don't know what HUD is, Housing and Urban Development, that's the government agency that's run by Ben Carson now. used to be very involved in the community. During this administration, things have happened. All right, so growth, grew. Chicago, New York City, and then as it grew, it became an organization. It became bigger and bigger and bigger, and the organization came to be known as the National Association of Midnight Basketball, NAMB, National Association of Midnight Basketball. All right, and the National Association grew to 38 programs across the country, each being nonprofit, each community-based, and each adhering to the formal training rules and regulations. Okay, so there were some knockoffs, there were some other copycats, but for the most part, the National Association of Midnight Basketball was nonprofit, community-based, and it had a formal set of trainings, a formal set of rules, and a formal set of regulations that you needed to follow in order to be a part of the association. All right, so one of the caveats and one of the things I don't necessarily like about the program, or maybe I think needed to be improved upon as it goes forward, it was stereotypical to a certain extent. Right, it just reached out to a certain segment of the population, right? That being African American young men, basketball and African American young men. I'm like, oh, okay, it's a little stereotypical, borders on racism. Not so. I think in order to have a successful program, it needs to be more diverse. Needs to be more inclusive. Needs to bring people of different communities and cultures and backgrounds together. So it's one of my problems with this with the organization. But I think it does a lot of good things. But maybe there's some stereotypicalness to it, which makes it a little bit controversial. Why was Midnight Basketball successful? Because overall it was and still is. Because it focused on outreach and recruitment. One of the reasons why was because there's two reasons, but one of the reasons why was because it focused on outreach and recruitment. All right, it's the beginning of a successful program. Right, is to be able to bring people into the program. You need to get outreach into the community to bring people in, and now you have to decide what you're going to do with them once you have them. All right, once you have the people here, now you got to decide what you can do them. Just play basketball? Okay, but is that enough? Maybe not, right? So Midnight Basketball was successful in recruitment and outreach, maybe not as successful, maybe not as insightful as saying, well, we have people, what else can we do with them besides playing basketball? All right, so just want you to think about that in your own community sports development project. You need to think about what your program actually does. All right. Midnight Basketball, play basketball. Great. The objective is to keep kids off the street. Get that. But what are you going to actually do? All right. What is your goal? What is your mission? What is your focus? Where do you want to take it beyond basketball? Keeping kids off the street is great. Fantastic. But what else can you do to help support the community? Right? You need a role in prevention, right? Right. Their theory was since participants are involved in this physical activity, they can't be involved in delinquency or offending, right? And they're diverting their proclivities towards other pursuits, all right, and that are exciting, challenging, and demanding. I get it, all right, and that makes perfect sense. Right, you keep the kids off the streets. You have them involved in something means they're not going to be involved in any delinquency or crime. Right, they're going to divert these pursuits, and these pursuits are exciting, challenging, and demanding, physically demanding. Right, basketball is not an easy sport. I can't run up and down the basketball court. Right, it's exciting. Basketball is exciting. It's challenging. Right, it's challenging your skill, challenging your abilities. Right, that's the good part. But you need to also focus on proactive-oriented ideals such as character building, self-discipline, socialization, and building up a young man or young woman's self-esteem. Okay, you need to be more than just basketball. You need to be, how else am I going to take these young people? And, Midnight Basketball is focused on young men. I think it should be focused on young men and women. How are you going to take them, now that you have them, in this program, build their character, build their self-discipline, build their self-esteem, and make them productive members of society. Last thing you want is for anybody to to get caught up in the negative aspects of the streets and go in a different way. No, we want everybody to be successful. We want everybody to move forward in a positive way, and whatever that is. I mean, however that can be. You need to, sports is great. Sport participation does not automatically mean a positive social force. You need to have a plan in place, and you need good leadership and role models to implement that plan, right? Practice could be positive, but it can also be a problem if the energies involved are not directed in the right direction. So your sports development programs need to focus on the sport, of course, bring in all these other things, education, job relations, and have good leaders and role models implement it. So the kids can go, wow, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is the direction I want to go. Oh, these are opportunities. I never heard of these opportunities before. Tell me more. That kind of stuff. All right. You need to set up the non-sports component. All right. What else can the program provide outside of sport? What other avenues can you provide for these kids? These kids so they can go on, because not everybody's going to be great at basketball. Not everybody's going to make it to college and play in the NCAA. Not everybody's going to make it to the pro, make it to the show, make it to the NBA. So knowing that and understanding that, you need to provide other avenues of success built around this sports component, of course. Okay, but you need to implement non-sports components too in order to bring the kids to success as well as the program. All right. So you need to incorporate non-sport developmental elements, right? Individual development, education, job training, those kind of things. All right. More than basketball, what else can you provide, and how are you going to provide it? And you need to have that leadership and those people, role models there to help drive it and direct it. Fair enough? All right. Always knowing that, sports has a social consequence and cultural power that extends beyond those directly engaged in the activity, right? Because, if you're helping these young people by having them come and play basketball in Midnight Basketball, you're giving them other outlets, giving them job-related training, you're giving them educational training, you're giving them outlooks that they never had before, or you're opening up their eyes to things that they never heard of before. Well, that's going to engage others in the community also, right? Sports has a social consequence, right? It's going to build on it, right? So, the kids who are playing basketball are going to go tell their friends, they're going to go tell their parents, they're going to go tell their siblings and cousins about what other avenues are out there beside sport, right? It extends beyond those directly engaged in the activity, right? And that's important. You got to, really, really think about that. What you're doing to help these kids is going to ripple through the community because it's going to help others, right? Not directly associated with your sports development program. All in a positive way, okay? And not just crime prevention, but in other ways, okay? All right. The results of Midnight Basketball, interestingly enough, crime rates in cities with Midnight Basketball decline more than cities without the program. So the program works, all right? Just need to build upon it, all right? And crime rate declined for both violent and non-violent, or what we call property crimes, okay? So violent crimes dropped by 90 offenses per 100,000 population, and property crimes or non-violent crimes dropped by 390 offenses per 100,000 population. That's incredible. So these programs do work, right? But you need to add more to it, right? Not just the sport aspect, but other aspects to it, all right? So really think about that when you're developing your sport development program, whatever it is. Sport is great. That's the building block. That's the foundation. That's what drives people in. It helps with recruitment. That's the thing that gets people going. That's the excitement. That's the energy. But what else? What other avenues? What other services are you going to provide these young people to get them on a road to success? Okay, because the sport may not be it, right? The sport's going to be what gets them in, but not everybody's going to play in the pros. That's just the reality. 1% of college athletes play in the pros, right? So the reality is that most people aren't going to play for the New York Giants. It's just not going to happen. Most people aren't going to play for the Warriors or the Rockets or Chicago Bulls or the Knicks. Not that anybody would want to play for the Knicks. Right? That's the reality. So what can we do now that we have them engaged in sport to lead to paths of success in other areas? And that's the crux of this matter. This is what I want to see out of your sports development program. Okay? All right. Those numbers there, you can't say Midnight Basketball is directly responsible for the decline in the crime rate, but there's an association and a correlation between the two. All right, it's unarguable. There is an association and correlations between the two. Keeping people engaged and off the street, diverting them from negative and giving them positives has a positive effect, without question. And that's built around sport. Okay? Thank you. Think about this. Come up with any questions you have. We'll discuss it all on Friday during the Zoom class. But interesting program, Midnight Basketball. I'm a fan. I think it could be better, but I am a fan. I think I had a lot of positivity to it. So, okay. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Zach, read a book, and I'll see you all on Friday.